could have 3 losses by now.
I don't know about that.
They are not that
For
good.
Florida State in there, I would say yes to that, what you just said.
Return by Caleb Downs, and he finds a seam. He makes the punter look silly. Caleb Downs, show him what you got. Touchdown, Bama.
I'm going to drive now for UTEP. And they will keep it on the ground. Awad just gets pile-driven by Stutzman.
Really haven't even tried from the shotgun. That throw's intercepted. Pierce down the sideline. Touchdown.
Claiborne, the sophomore, has 1 score so far this season. Rivers will buy a little bit of time. Falling down, lost the football. Play is still live. And recovered by the Monarchs. Lamarian James will take it the other way for the ODU touchdown.
Welcome back to Devy IDP Grind. I'm Hollywood. I'm joined by my co-host Justice. We took a couple of weeks off, and then I got the flu and was out for a couple of weeks. And Justice had surgery, so he missed a week. It's been a rough go to 2025, man.
Yeah. I got sick too. Not as bad as you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, this flu A is horrible. Well, you heard me before we jumped on. I'm still coughing. It's like 3 weeks. I'm still coughing. I'm over it. But unlike you, I can move my arms, so I got that.
Yeah, well, that's a big positive. I can't use my right arm for another. I got 5 more weeks.
Oh, I couldn't
Well, 5
imagine.
more weeks before I'm out of the sling. I don't know how much I can use it at that point because they said I can't even be weight bearing on it for 3 months. So,
oh, that's horrible. Because you're like me, I'm right-handed, so not being able to do anything with my right hand, I'd go insane because I'm just.
yeah, it's hard, man. You don't realize how many tasks require 2 hands. Shaving is very difficult.
Oh, well, you mentioned not being able to use your mouse, and I was doing something at work here a while back, and I grabbed my mouse from the opposite side of my desk and was trying to do something. So it was in my left hand, and I felt plumb just dumb because I couldn't get it to move.
Yeah, I mean that's probably not to me the most difficult thing is not being able to type.
Yeah,
I'm a 2-hand. I'm a pretty fast typer, 2-hand typer, and the fact that I got out there, I can only use 1 hand, and I got to hunt and peck. It irks my nerves. So I try to avoid it as much as possible.
Yeah. I'm the same way. I'm a 2-hand peck at it, but I'm pretty fast at it. But yeah, take away my right hand, I'm pretty much useless. So we'll try to catch up on some things that we missed. And once we get going next week, we'll try to catch up pretty quick. News and notes: the FBS coaches voted in favor of a proposal that would reduce the transfer portal down to a single 10-day window in January.
I don't think this solves anything. I think it actually creates more problems, personally. But
see, I kind of felt the same way. I mean, you're just.
Actually, I think it's worse, right? Because now you got 10 days, you don't know who's leaving. You may or may not know who's leaving, right? And then you only got 10 days to replace them, and that's and school starts in January, and so I think this is a horrible idea.
Now my question is, and I don't remember seeing this. Is this 10-day window in January, is that around the time that you have the deadline to declare for the draft is?
They haven't really set a date yet, and this hasn't passed yet either. So,
Right. Well, that would be my question. I mean, that's my question. Would it be? But
no,
I would almost think
it'd be in early January. I think, like my personal opinion, it'd be the first 10 days in January, something like that. But
well, then I guess what I'm getting at is if you do that early, like you said, early January, and the deadline to declare for the NFL draft is like late January or 1st of February. What if you're sitting there? I don't know. We'll use Tennessee for an example. What if you're sitting there with James Pierce and then that window's passed and then he up and says, "Well, I'm going to the draft. I'm going to enter the draft." That kind of leaves these schools that maybe think they're
know that before time, ahead of time. Not really any different. It's not really any different than it is today, other than you have a spring window.
I know, but the spring window kind of allows you to.
I hope Tennessee knew that James Pierce was going to the draft before he officially declared for the draft.
Right.
To me, the bigger issue is you're going to lose players. You got 10 days and only those 10 days to do something. I mean, you know what? If I was a player, you know what I would do probably. This might, if this passes, this could potentially have the opposite intent of what they want, and that's every single player enter the portal, right? You're only going to give me 10 days. I'm going to enter the portal, and then take my chances. I might come back. I might not. Whatever. Could have the opposite effect of what they intend.
Oh, that would be brutal. Oh my God, that would be. Oh.
But I also think if this did pass and then someone sued the NCAA, it would go away. And then the rule would be you can leave whenever you freaking want to, because they can't restrict.
Well, that seems to be the MO, right? I mean, every little thing here lately in all sports, baseball, basketball, even or football, basketball, and even baseball to an extent. You see the NCAA and they just kind of give in more or less. So, yeah, I'm with you on that.
And I don't think this solves any problem with like bowl games, because if I'm going to leave, I'm still going to leave before the bowl game. Why? If I know I'm leaving, why am I going to risk playing in a bowl game to get hurt? I'm not going to do that. So, it doesn't really solve that problem either. I don't think it solves any problem.
Which takes us to the next one. Speaking of bowl games, and I know we're playing catch up here because we've been away, but Marshall opted out of the bowl game, the Independence bowl game, after they lost, and we spoke about this. I think 25 plus players.
Their entire roster, they had 75 player turnover. That's players coming and going, but it was 75 players, I think.
And so they were fined by the Sun Belt Conference $100K for that.
Well, yeah, I mean, they signed an agreement, right? They signed a contract, and then by voiding that contract, it cost the Sun Belt money.
But what do you? And I agree with you. I'm with you. But what do you do, Justice, when, like you said, you've got 75 players coming and going, and you're trying to get ready for a bowl game? I mean, how do you combat that? I mean, I would kind of see the school's stance on it as well. I mean, if all these players hit the portal, I guess it depends on if they're starters or not. But still, if you're losing 25 players, you're probably looking at a few depth pieces that you're using, at the very least. I mean, it's kind of like the players have all the power now because they're not, they transfer wherever they want to, and there's no penalty to them. The school's the one taking the hit
here. Yeah.
So I think
it's not going to get any better.
Something has to be done there too.
I mean, eventually there'll be a collective bargaining agreement, and the players will be employees of the university, and it'll all be spelled out then.
Right. And I'm watching Auburn Ole Miss right now in the basketball game, and my apologies for the cough. They got Charles Barkley on because it's Auburn or whatever, and he was talking about this NIL, and he said this is not a sustainable model. It only benefits. He's like, this only benefits your big schools and not even all of them. Like your smaller schools, they can't pay $20 million to roster a team. They can't, they just don't physically, or not physically, they don't just financially have the means to do that. So he's kind of thinking that probably something along like a CBA as well. He didn't say that, but listening to him speak, he's kind of thinking that as well, which I think this whole thing's a mess. We've talked about this the past couple of years as it's coming, and it's turning this whole thing into a
Yeah, and it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. Unfortunately.
Yeah. And I don't have it on the sheet. Again, apologies for the coughing. But I did see that there's talks that the SEC and the Big Ten are looking to just do their own thing with the playoffs.
Yeah. I mean, I think eventually they will. They will do their own thing.
Now, from what I saw and heard, it's going to be them and the Big Ten. They're willing to include the ACC and the Big 12 into this with maybe.
With them getting like one team apiece and the other two getting like 5 or some crap. Yeah, why would you sign up for that? Like,
and they're also.
They probably will.
Supposedly, they're going to allow, like 1, maybe 2 of the best from the group of 5 or group of 6, whatever it is. Your other something's got to be done, or the SEC and the Big Ten they're going to dominate this whole thing. They already are. So.
Yeah, that's where it's going.
Catching up on a little bit of coaching news here. The USC Trojans have hired Rob Ryan to be their new defensive coordinator.
Interesting, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
Be interested to see how that works out.
Yeah, because they hired the dude from North Dakota State last year after that horrible.
They had the guy from UCLA. They had the guy from UCLA.
Yeah, UCLA.
Who did a really good job there.
Yeah, so I think he got them headed in the right direction. But yeah, this Rob Ryan hire should be, hey, as you said, that should be interesting.
Yeah. Entertaining if nothing else.
Oh, gosh, yeah. And in a big market like that, yeah, that should be some must-watch TV. Notre Dame Fighting Irish have hired Chris Ash to be their new defensive coordinator. So they're changing. After going to the national championship, they're looking to improve on defense. The Texas Longhorns and Steve Sarkisian, their head coach, have agreed on a 7-year extension. So that's going to take him through, 2032? I think it was.
Yeah.
So apparently he has no plans on leaving. I'm sure there's a big buyout involved in that.
Like, where would he go? Like, NFL? I mean, that's the only place I can see him leaving.
Yeah. You know how the NFL is. If you're a good coach like that and you're winning year after year, there's always interest. Whether or not you leave or not, they always come calling to see if you have any interest. But I'm sure if he did, I'm sure there's some kind of big buyout there. And then it seems like it's a new trend. We've kind of seen it for the past year, maybe 2 years. But it's the college trend is hiring for head coach hires, they're hiring former players, and it kind of started like you saw this kind of coming when former players quit to coach high school, right? You saw them going to coach high school teams, and then maybe they would jump into coaching at other levels. But it seems now with Deshaun Jackson and Michael Vick and some of these others, Dion kind of leading the way with all this. That kind of seems to be the new trend right now. Do you like that, or
I mean, I don't know. Like the jury's still out, I think, right? The problem is a lot of these guys that don't have any coaching experience at all, whether it be even high school, right? And so it's like they're hiring them for name value, and then hope. Then you gotta. It just makes the other coaches hires that much more important, right? Because they don't have that experience, and so I don't know. I personally don't think I would like that model, right? I'd rather hire the name guy as an assistant versus my head coach,
yeah,
and then my head coach have some experience. But I don't know. We'll see how it works out, right? I mean, you got Michael Vick now, Deshaun Jackson. Those are probably the two most recent ones, right?
yeah. Well, it's kind of the whole Dion factor too, right? It's money because when he was at
Yeah, but
Jackson State, they were
Dion
selling
was
out
at Jackson State.
games.
At least he had that experience, right? He was at Jackson State,
True,
before Colorado.
but even still at Jackson State, that was kind of the thing, right? The big name at the smaller school, and they're selling out games, and they're getting high recruits, which these two haven't done yet. But I think that's kind of, hey, let's get a big name coach in here that everybody knows. Michael Vick. Everybody knows Michael Vick. One way or another, Michael Vick. So if you can go to watch him be a head coach, it's not going to cost you very much, most likely, to get in, and it's going to boost sales, ticket sales, concessions, all that. So just interesting. I thought that was an interesting trend that we're starting to see players jumping into coaching. Which, if you could coach, and as for Dion, I know me and you hate talking about Colorado, but I think Dion's done it the right way, right? I mean, he went to Jackson State and cut his teeth for a couple of years, and he proved he could do it, right? I mean, he's pretty smart when you take away the theatrics and the drama and all that stuff. Dion's pretty freaking smart and knows how to play ball, and he knows how to coach it, right? He's surrounding himself with smart people that knows the same thing. So if that's the path or the result that I can get, I'm okay with it. But I'm like you, I don't know that every player will be able to pull that off. That's a pretty hard feat to do what Dion's done.
Yeah. And how much longer is he gonna stay in college, right? His name was thrown around a lot for NFL vacancies this last time, and so didn't get one. But how much longer before he does get one?
Yeah.
To me, it's a different ball game. I think he's gonna have to show some. He's gonna have to win a lot in college before. If I'm an NFL owner, right? Because your name value in the NFL doesn't mean nearly as much as it does in college.
Right. I agree with that. Yes. And if I was an NFL coach, I'm like you, or an NFL owner, I would be like you. You're going to have to show not that he's done anything wrong and not that he's a bad coach, but for me to turn my organization over to you to lead.
Well, it's going to be somewhat of a circus, right? I mean, that's just what's going to happen. And so,
and I'm with you. I need to see more winning before I could do that.
It pains me to say this, but like the only owner today I see doing it would be Jerry Jones. And I'll be honest with you, that's because I don't think Jerry Jones really cares about winning anymore. I think it's all about making money. To him, making money is winning. So hiring Dion would be more money. That's winning to him.
Oh yeah. Yep. I agree. Ohio State safety Caleb Downs stated in an interview with Alabama.com that he didn't want to leave Alabama. But when Saban retired, that was a major factor in him leaving. And we kind of thought that too, right? We kind of discussed that because he wanted to go learn from Saban, who's like a DB guru. I mean, he's one of the best head coaches of all time, but you've heard the stories. He spent a lot of time with defensive backs, and I think that's one of the reasons Downs went there. So,
sure.
Just I find things like that kind of interesting how they play out, because it's just weird to me or interesting to me. The TSAA has voted, and that's the Tennessee State high school sports. They have voted against a one-time transfer rule proposal for high school.
You shouldn't be able to transfer in high school. Like, I mean,
Exactly.
like if you move, you transfer. I don't think like there needs to be transfer portal for high school.
No,
I mean,
that does not.
we all know that it happens, right?
Right.
But man, like you shouldn't formalize it. I don't know.
Yeah, when I first read this, I had to go back and read it again. I was like, "What?" And they're like, "No, we're not putting in a rule that's going to let high school. Because if you do that, you thought college was bad. Put in a transfer rule at the high school level and see what happens. It would be complete anarchy."
No, in a lot of places, there's already ways to accomplish what you want to accomplish. So just leave it the way it is.
Yep, I agree. And then a piece of news I saw just before I jumped on, LSU linebackers Harold Perkins and Whit Weeks are both expected to miss the spring. Well, they're not expected. They're going to miss the spring, but they're expected to be ready for the season. So, speaking of spring games, and I've heard this from there's been some discussion about it in Tennessee. I know some schools have already kind of stated that they're looking to either basically do away with spring games.
Yeah, it's just coaches being paranoid.
Yeah, I think so too.
I don't like it's dumb. Coaches being paranoid. It's bad for fans. It's bad for college football, right? To me, they should be embracing, and you don't have to have a game, right? But you have some kind of event, some kind of showcase, centered around the football team. Just to get fans involved, to build that excitement, right? I think they're going about it the wrong way. Like, to me, that's the way they should be. It should be more inclusive, more about involving fans. And again, it doesn't have to be a game, but just something to kind of help build that excitement, especially in this new era with the transfer portal. Like, get to know the faces, you know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff. It's your opportunity to introduce your fans to your team. And like, they should be embracing that and celebrating that, not trying to get rid of it, in my opinion.
So would you rather see something like what Ole Miss did last year? I call it a circus, but would you rather see something like
I mean, if that's what you want to do, sure. Like, exactly. Do something, though. Now what I also heard, like, is they'd rather is to get rid of the spring and then let them start earlier in the summer and do, like, NFL stuff, NFL OTAs and all that.
Yeah, I've heard that as well.
I don't know. Like, to me, it doesn't matter either one. As long as as long as you can involve fans and they have some access and get to know the team and help build excitement for the program, I think that's what you need to do.
Yeah, there's some discussion in Tennessee, and I don't know what they're looking to do, but for years it's been free, right? The spring game has been free.
Yeah.
And you go to Neyland
Stay that
Stadium.
way.
Yeah, well, you go to Neyland Stadium and there's over 100,000 seats, and it's not sold out, but there's a lot of people shows up. like you said, they want to see what kind of product you got. They want to be introduced to the players. It's just a fun atmosphere because they do the whole thing before the game where you're meet and greets and the whole 9 yards. It's a whole day thing. And I usually try to go to them. And then last year they came up with, well, we're going to charge you to go to the spring game. Okay, that's fine if that's what you want to do.
Well, it should be very minimal.
Well, the cost was very minimal, and I don't remember what that was. But here's the kicker: they wanted to limit the amount of people. So you're sitting there with a 100,000 seat stadium, and they only wanted to let 10,000 in.
Yeah,
that makes no sense. Why would
not if you're going to charge them?
True. So I don't know if that was they were afraid because of charging that they wouldn't get enough in there to make it worthwhile, or what. But I didn't go last year. I was like, well, if I'm going to have to drive an hour,
I don't know.
It just wasn't
always been free. It hasn't been a game in a while. It's more of like a glorified practice.
Yeah, that's kind of what ours is too. Yeah,
I don't know.
Weird scoring and all that.
A couple thousand people. It's definitely they only let you sit on one half of the stadium, and like I said, it'll be a couple thousand people. It's not like there's not a lot of people there.
Right. Anyway, just something interesting. I'm sure we'll have as we get closer to the spring now. I'm sure we'll have a ton of news coming. Our 5-star topic. We've got an award winner.
Yeah, we have an award winner first that we didn't finish covering.
Yeah, Boston College's Donovan Ezeruku was awarded the Ted Hendricks Award for Best Defensive End in college football. And I probably agree with that.
I don't agree that he was number one.
Well, I know who you're picking.
But if my number one was not going to win, he would be my number two. So I don't have as much.
And yours would be Mike Green, right?
Yeah, I think Mike Green was number one.
Yeah.
But certainly you can make an argument for him too. So I don't have heartburn with it. It wasn't like they picked, some guys got 20 tackles and 5 sacks.
Right. So our 5-star topic is transfer players. We've got it broken down.
Well, I guess the question was something along the lines of when defensive players transfer up from a smaller school to a bigger school, what should be our expectations? So I made a list, I guess, of players that did it 2 years ago. And then we have a list of players that are doing it this year. And I thought we would just look at the production of them, right?
Yep. So if you want to lead the way with this.
So the first player by position, look at edges, Nick Scourton. He didn't transfer from the G5, but he transferred from Purdue, not a great school, to the SEC and the Texas A&M. And his production did suffer, right? He goes from 50 tackles and 10 sacks at Purdue in 2023 to 37 tackles and 5 sacks at Texas A&M in 2024. Now, did he hurt his draft stock? No, I don't think so. I don't think he hurt his draft stock at all. But from a college production standpoint, it was a big hit, right? He went from, probably someone you started to probably someone you didn't start anymore.
Right, because in 2000, like you said, in 2023, when he was with Purdue, he led the Big Ten in sacks. He was the Big Ten leader. And then last year, he makes the move to the SEC, as you mentioned, to Texas A&M, and he only had 5. So
yeah, even his tackle numbers were not quite, but they were down quite a bit from 50 to 37 tackles.
But I think you're going to see
I mean, that's a theme we're going to see. I think that's to be expected. When you move
exactly.
up,
That's exactly
when
what
you
I'm about to
move
say.
up, you are now a rotational piece. I don't have his snap
Yes.
numbers in front of me, but I would venture to guess his. I'm gonna look it up right now, but I would venture to guess his snap count.
bet
Also went
they're
down.
half of what they were.
Yeah, I'm gonna bear with me.
Because
Typing with my one hand.
go ahead while you're looking that up. I mean, I would venture to say that they're probably half of what they were at Purdue, because you got to think about where he's at. Texas A&M, and what have we heard for the past, I don't know, 3-4 years in recruiting? They've had one of the best recruiting classes for the past 3 or 4 years, and especially at defensive line. Your edges, your defensive tackles. I mean, they had one class where it seemed like they had every top defensive lineman in that class sign with them. So you've got a lot of mouths to feed. You've got a lot of talent that you're putting on the field. I think when you make a move like that, I mean, Purdue doesn't have that problem, right? I mean, he's going from being the guy to a guy, and that's not saying that he's not that good. It's just the situation.
So he went from 700 snaps in 23 at Purdue to 701 to 558. So almost 200 less
About
snaps.
a third. Yeah.
So yeah, a third of his snaps went away. And I just think that's a common thing, right? It's a common thing when you go to some of these. Now, if you go to a lower end, if you go from like a G5 to Purdue, probably not that big a deal. But you go into the SEC, you go into the SEC, you go into the Big Ten, or Clemson or some of these programs, like you should automatically understand, like these players, generally speaking, there's going to be exceptions to every rule, but generally speaking, their college production is not going to be great. I mean, look at Caleb Downs. He went from Alabama to Ohio State, two premier spots, but from a production standpoint, in terms of stats, his stats suffered. Now I'm sure he didn't play any less snaps, but just a different style, different defense, right? And so doesn't mean he's not a good player. He is. He's one of the best players in college football, but his production in terms of stats suffered with that switch.
Yes. Yeah, his stats, and I'm sure we'll probably
I don't think I have him in the list because he went from Alabama to Ohio State. Really not what the point of the question wasn't really part of the question, but
well, I mean, I'm looking at his stats. You're right. So as a freshman at Alabama, he had 107 tackles, 70 solos, which led the entire SEC. 4 TFLs, 2 interceptions, 4 pass deflections. And then he had, a fumble, forced fumble, a fumble recovery. You go to Ohio State, and he had he did have 25 less tackles. So he dropped from 107 to 82. His solos dropped from 70 to 49. He still had the 2 picks. But to your point, they used him different. His TFLs went up. So he went from 4 TFLs to 8. His pass deflections went up, and he was an All-American. So
and his snap count actually went up. He had 917 snaps at Ohio State, 890 in Alabama, but his tackle numbers were down.
But I think he's kind of he's not the perfect example for this either.
No, but it's just the point being, hey, like when you move schools, you're going to be used. Typically, you're going to be used differently. And if you're going,
I mean, you've had a discussion about, and I don't think he's on your list. He's not. I mean, you had the same discussion because of my Devy rankings about Dylan Thieneman from Purdue.
Yeah, I mean, yes, yeah. Hey, I think he's further down because he's a transfer for next year, so he's on my list, I think.
All right, who you got next?
I'm looking up his stats, but it's Caden Woolard. I think he went from Ball State to Oklahoma.
Yes, he did.
As an edge,
and yeah. So in 2023, Woolard played for Miami of Ohio, and he led the MAC in sacks with 9.5.
yeah, goes to he had, let's see, 41 tackles, 12 tackles for loss, 9.5 sacks. Goes to Oklahoma, SEC in 2024, has 13 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and 1.5 sacks. And his snap count, he went from 788 snaps at Miami of Ohio to 200 snaps at Oklahoma.
Huge difference, almost 3/4 of a drop.
Yeah, I mean, he played in every game, but he was only playing anywhere between 15 to, let's say on average 15 to 20 snaps a game, somewhere around there. He's a rotational piece, right? And that's just what's gonna happen, right? You go to these SEC, Big Tens, the Clemsons of the world. You're no longer the big man on campus, and you're going to be a rotational piece. And so, not to steal the thunder of what I think we're going to see this point illustrated over and over again tonight is, when you make this move up, I think if you're in a league, you need to decide, is that player an NFL player or not? If you don't think that, if you think that player is not an NFL player, they shouldn't be on your roster anymore, because you're not going to start them. The stats are going to suffer. You should try to trade them for whatever you can get for them, or move on, because they're not usable from a college production standpoint.
Yeah, you're right. The competition level, and you're going to hear that over and over tonight. The jump up, right? For a lot of these, it's the competition level, but for some, it's the depth that you're going to. Like, if you're, like we talked about, Downs, he moved from Alabama to Ohio State. When you're moving from one bigger school to another, it's more about the depth that they have, right? Because we talked about Texas A&M having so much depth that he just didn't get the reps. But your next one is really going to tell the story.
Well, because at a Purdue or at a Miami of Ohio, there's a big difference between their first and second string and third string. In the SEC, they don't want there to be a difference. They want a constant rotation of fresh bodies. And so that's just how it's going to be. Doesn't mean they're not talented players, but generally speaking, their production is going to be less, because that's just the nature of the beast.
And your next one is going to be a great example, because in 23, he was a darling for IDP Devy, right? And then this year, not so much.
Yeah, that's edge Trey Moore, going from UTSA to Texas. At UTSA, 45 tackles, 18 tackles for loss, and 14 sacks. Goes to Texas, 35 tackles. So the tackle numbers aren't bad. They're comparable. Right. 10 tackles for loss, only 5.5 sacks. Let's see. His snap count actually went up at Texas. So that's kind of interesting, right? He had 502 snaps at UTSA in 2023, had 674 snaps at Texas. So, he saw an increase in snaps, but still saw a decrease in production. He stepped up a level. You saw Colin Simmons do, I think, what you expected Trey Moore to do.
Yes. And I think, and maybe I want to see if you agree with me here. I think a lot of times we overlook the competition level, or we forget, right? And I mentioned that here with Trey Moore because everybody that played IDP Devy, they knew who Trey Moore was. They was on him. They had him on rosters, or they were trying to get him in trades, whatever. And he goes to Texas, and that's a big jump going from UTSA to Texas. That's a huge jump. So he went from the American Conference Defensive Player of the Year in 23 to, I don't want to say an average Joe, but he wasn't somebody you were dependent on for your IDP Devy rosters. I mean, you may have been at the front of the season, but once the year got going, those first, 3-4 games, you were kind of looking at it and going, oh, what am I going to do here?
Yeah. Next up, edge Cassius Howell goes from Bowling Green in 2023 to Texas A&M in 2024. At Bowling Green in 23, he had 28 tackles, 11 tackles for loss, 9.5 sacks. Texas A&M in 2024, 40 tackles, so a slight increase in tackles. 9 TFLs, about the same, but his sack numbers dropped to 4. Snap-wise, he dropped a little bit. It wasn't terrible. He went from 532 snaps at Bowling Green to 485 snaps at Texas A&M. Again, just the way it is, right? And so, like, I don't know, like you weren't starting Cassius Howell at Texas A&M this year. Now, so again, the question is, do you think he has NFL potential? If he does, you're going to keep him on your roster. If you don't, you just got to let him go.
And here's the thing about Cassius Howell that we kind of touched on just a moment ago with Scourton, right? And I think this is where, when you put together, because you do most of the work on those, when we do our spring, our team breakdowns, players to watch, conference by conference breakdown, team by team, I think it's important to really look at those because, if you don't know who Cassius Howell was, and you're looking at Nick Scourton, you're going, okay, he's going to Texas A&M, he's going to be the guy. Or vice versa. Maybe you're a big fan of the MAC, and you know who Cassius Howell was, but you didn't know who Nick Scourton was. Well, there's part of your problem, right? First of all, they're both going to the same school. They both went to Texas A&M. So there's going to be a natural clash there just between those two, fighting for playing time or being the guy. But also, Texas A&M, what did I say a minute ago? They had 3 or 4 years where they just loaded up on defensive linemen, and now you're adding 2 more to the mix. Because if you don't forget, at one point, they had Walter Nolan, Shamar Stewart, Shamar Turner. I mean, they are loaded. So to expect Scourton or Howell or both to go in there and just take over or repeat what they had been doing, to me, that's a little crazy. Both are good players. I mean, just the situation, to me, you have to pump the brakes on it. Right?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Next up for the edges, Trey Smith goes from San Jose State to Arizona. At San Jose State in 2023, 66 total tackles, 10 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks. At Arizona in 2024, 53 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks. So slight drops across the board. And the same as with snaps. He goes from 690 snaps at San Jose State to 566 snaps at Arizona. Again, he goes from, probably like a spot starter for you maybe, to not being able to be started at all. and probably has zero NFL potential, or not high NFL potential anyway. Just that's kind of the trend, right? I mean, you look at it size wise, he's kind of a really light defensive end at only 225 pounds.
Right. And for me, if you're, and I'm going to use Trey Smith here for an example, since we're on him. And I think this kind of fits with all players that we're talking about or going to talk about. But if you're going to continue to roster these guys, like you said, if you think they have NFL potential, then you need to keep them on your roster. If not, then you try to move them or whatever. But if you're still kind of undecided on, okay, until I can move them, what do I do with them? I think the best course of action, or I won't say the best course, but one way to approach it is start them early in the season. Why early in the season? Because look at what Arizona did in last year. Their second game of the season was against Northern Arizona. What did Trey Smith do? He had 6 tackles, 4 solos, 2 for a loss, and a sack. That was probably by far his best game.
Right. You
because after that,
you should be trying to move him at that point if you hadn't
exactly
already
because after that you're not far away. What, Justice? The first 2, 3, maybe 4 games of the year, you're playing lower level cupcakes, if you will, before you get into your conference schedule. Because once you get in your conference schedule, that's really when it's going to be hard to do anything. So I think you're right. I would play them early. And if they have a game like that and you're not sure, like Justice said, if you're not sure that they're NFL quality player, hey, he just had 6 tackles, 4 solos, 2 for a loss, and a sack. If you feel that they're not an NFL player, Justice just told you the way to handle it. You trade them right after that game because somebody is not going to see it that way, and they're going to be like, man, he had a monster game. And that's when you can maximize your value as a trade.
All right. Next up for the edges, Jaquez Evans goes from Western Kentucky to Baylor. I'm going to start with his 2022 stats because that's kind of where he really broke out. In 2022 at Western Kentucky, he had 106 tackles, 14 tackles for loss, 8.5 sacks in 14 games. 23 at Western Kentucky, he had injuries. He only played six games, only ended up with 30 tackles and 1 sack. Transfers to Baylor. Transfers to Baylor. Only plays 3 games in Baylor. Has 1 tackle and no sacks. And as you imagine, obviously his snap count went down. He only played in 3 games at Baylor. He goes from, and part of that's probably injury, but part of it's the moving up. In 2022 for Western Kentucky, 894 snaps. 2023 at Western Kentucky, 328 snaps, and then last year at Baylor, 45 snaps. He's not exactly what we were talking about, but somewhat because he was injured his last year at Western Kentucky, had the monster season in 2022, transfers up. Injuries are part of it, right? But, injuries aside, he would have never come close to 100 tackles and, double-digit sacks at Baylor. Just wouldn't have happened. And I think he's transferred again. He's transferred again now. He's not at Baylor anymore. Off the top of my head, I don't recall where he ended up transferring to, but
I'm not sure where that was either.
No, I'm looking up the last.
How much, while you're looking that up, let me ask you a question. Because with him, it seems to be the injuries the last couple seasons was a part of the issue, right?
Yeah.
How much do you take that into effect? Like, because with the injuries the past 2 years, you really don't know how he would fare with the competition jump. But is that with the injuries? Are you willing to hold him to see, or I mean, I know I guess it goes back to what you stated earlier. If you think he's an NFL player, then you hold on to him. But does the injuries play a big factor into that for you, or are you just kind of
Well, to me, it's
making that a middle note?
probably a double red flag, right? You've had an injury, and now you're making a big jump up. That's like you already got one strike against you with injury. Now it's a second strike against you, making a big step up. So, like, to me, it's just another negative and another reason to avoid, right? Like, you can't.
Right.
I mean, you can't predict injuries, et cetera. But an injury on top of making a big jump to a Power 4 school, to me should be just even more of a red flag.
Right.
The last edge we have on this list is Kennard Snyder from Louisiana Monroe. He goes from Louisiana Monroe to Iowa State. In 2023, he has 60 total tackles, 15 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks in 12 games. He goes to Iowa State. He plays in 10 games, has 8 tackles, 2 sacks, 2 tackles for loss. He played 2 less games, but he played in the games. But his snap count took a humongous hit. He went from 718 snaps in 23 at UL Monroe to 123 snaps at Iowa State.
Woo!
So yeah, he's not. He's not just. You're just not gonna be productive, and so like I don't know, like that's kind of the end of the edges. Well, next up is the linebackers, but just a rule of
But I
thumb.
think
It's
the theme
almost
is
like
going to be the same thing, kind of though.
yeah, I
The
think
theme.
so.
Yeah.
I mean, here at the edges, like you should. It's almost like you should discount their stats in half when they make that big jump
Yes.
up.
Yes. And especially if they're making a jump from like a Division II. If they are just throwing insane stats at Division II, who was the linebacker from North Dakota State that went to LSU? It's not the perfect example, but
I know what you're talking about, but I can't think of his name.
He actually did pretty well at LSU, but
yeah, I mean, like Jared Verse. Jared Verse did fine at Florida State. There are exceptions to the rule, but like
exactly,
if you're gonna bet money, you're gonna bet money on their stats being less than their stats being more or equal.
Right, because I don't think anybody would have said he's going from the University of Albany to Florida State and he's going to put up the numbers he did at Florida State. You would be hard to find anybody to say that they thought that would happen, and I'd still probably call them a liar because we're guessing.
Sure.
And for every Jared Verse that you find, you're going to have 100 players that's going to go the opposite.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, it's just a bad bet. It's a bad bet.
Yep.
All right, let's move over to the linebackers. First is going to be Wayne Matthews II, who goes from Old Dominion to Michigan State. At Old Dominion in 2023, 135 total tackles, 10 TFLs, 3.5 sacks. He goes to Michigan State in 2024, 33 tackles. So 100 less tackles, no TFLs, and no sacks. His snap count goes from 936 snaps to 243.
Wow.
Right? He's just he's a depth piece for him, man. He played in 10 of their games. But he was a rotational piece. He wasn't He wasn't full time on the field, and huge gap, huge dip in production, right? Dip in production, dip in snaps. To me, that's got to be your expectation going in with
Yes.
these players. So once again, like you really just kind of have to rely on what you think of them as a potential NFL player, because that's what you're looking at, with these guys transferring.
Now that we're on linebackers, quick question. Because we know edge is different from linebacker. Linebacker's different from safety. Safety's different from interior defensive line, yada, yada, yada. As we go through these, do you think there's a position that is less, the word I'm looking for, less affected by this? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think defensive line's the most affected, because I think when you get to those high ends, there's so much more rotational piece.
mm-hmm.
Whereas I think, linebacker and maybe safety, maybe not as much of a rotational piece. It's going to be more about your opportunities, right? And so, I mean, you're going to take a hit. You go from, a bad defense where you're the man to where, a really good defense. Obviously, there's going to be less opportunities for tackles, all that kind of stuff. But I feel like, especially linebacker to me is, if I had to pick a position where maybe it's more about opportunity and less about talent, I would say linebacker.
Yeah, I think so too. I think safety would be, for me, I think safety would maybe be the next linebacker.
All right, next is Demetrius Knight, linebacker, going from Charlotte to South Carolina. In 2023 in Charlotte, he had 96 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks, 3 interceptions. He goes to South Carolina, 82 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 1 interception. So he pretty much, for all intents and purposes, duplicated his stats. Snap-wise, he went from 619 snaps at Charlotte to 572 at South Carolina. So, again, he kind of produced about the same. But he's a linebacker. He was a starting middle linebacker for South Carolina, and so if you're going to be a starting middle linebacker for an SEC school, I would have expected his stats to, be close to par, right?
Right. Yep. Yeah, I think he, from the jump from Charlotte in the American to South Carolina in the SEC, I think just the little difference that you're seeing in the stats, I think that's acceptable. That's kind of what you're looking at. You're okay with that.
Yeah, and it wasn't like, and I think in his case, he was originally went to Georgia Tech. So it wasn't like, he was recruited by Charlotte. He was recruited by an ACC school. Ended up going to to Charlotte after playing at Georgia Tech for a couple of years, and then went to SEC. So he clearly was a talented player coming out of high school to begin with. Just never really got his opportunity at Georgia Tech. Right. Next up is linebacker Byron Parham, going from San Jose State to Washington. This is a real good one. He goes from 106 tackles, 5 TFLs, 2.5 sacks, and interception at San Jose State in 2023, to 11 tackles in 2024 at Washington. He was the man. He was the starting middle linebacker at San Jose State. As you might imagine, his snap count went down drastically. Goes from 779 snaps to 103 snaps. he only started one game. He only played in 4 games, and he split his time between middle linebacker and weak side linebacker while at Washington. But yeah, just a classic example of moving up, and he's not the big man on campus anymore, right? Didn't hardly play at all for a Washington team, and he ended up transferring again. I don't remember where he transferred to, but he's transferred again.
And to piggyback off your stat count there, you said 799 at San Jose State. That's 13 games. That's 59.9 snaps a game. So roughly 60 snaps a game. And he went to
he never came off the field.
Right. So he went to Washington and played. He only played 4 games, but he only had 100 and what? What did you say?
103 snaps. His highest snap total was 33.
So see, he went from 60 a game down to basically 25. So a huge drop. If you're not getting if you're not getting on the field to get the reps, that's concerning. And even if you are on the field, the 4 games that he played, he was only getting about 5 snaps a game. So when you're losing 35 snaps from the previous year per game, your stats are going to they're going to take a hit big
time. This next player, kind of same thing, man. Goes from Ohio to Pittsburgh. He had 2 seasons in Ohio with 90-plus tackles. He had 96 tackles in 2022, 93 tackles in 2023. Transfers to Pittsburgh, who had a need for a linebacker, and he ends up with 28 tackles in 2024. That's Key Thompson was a key player for Ohio.
Yep.
His snap count goes from 751 and 665 at Ohio to 247 at Pitt. He never started a game, didn't start a single game at Pitt. He was a rotational piece. His snap count per game went from a high of 43 to a low of 11. So he was just a rotational piece. While he was there, he played in, I don't know, 13 games at Pitt. But just he wasn't the man anymore.
No, and this brings me to another point that we've kind of talked about too. So, like, he played 5 seasons at Ohio, redshirted, had the COVID year that didn't count. So he had some extra eligibility that a lot of players don't get. And that's fine. But something I touched on about earlier, I get probably why he moved, because let's face it, Ohio is not a huge producer of NFL talent. So making the jump to a bigger school and a bigger conference, right? You're going from the MAC to the ACC with Pitt. There's a little more eyes on you. Thought is, hey, if I can go to a bigger conference, a bigger school, and still ball out, it'll help my NFL evaluation or grade, right? But if you miss here, you're kind of screwed. So to me, I would have rather, if I have this extra year, I would have rather stayed at Ohio for a 6th season, where odds are I'm going to be the top dog again, than to go to a bigger school and get less playing time. My stats suffer. Because when you do that, there's going to be questions. Why did your stats suffer? Why did you not get the same amount of playing time that you were getting before? What derailed you or got you off course? Is it because A, you're not that good? B, is it, whatever the answer is, I think when you make that transition and it doesn't work out, there's more questions than you need to be if you're aspiring to go to the NFL. If I'm trying to go to the NFL, I think the Trey Moore switch was legit. I think that was the right move in a way for him because UTSA to Texas, that's a big jump. Now, luckily for him, he has this year to bounce back and really show that that was an aberration, right? But if you're in your last year and you make this move and miss, I think it's almost as far as NFL goes, it's almost a career killer, right?
Well, potentially, yeah. I mean, now maybe they're getting more NIL money, and so can't blame them for that.
That's a whole other topic. True. True.
But yeah, I mean, you've now either when you make these big jumps like that, you've done one of two things. You've either proven you belong or you've proven you don't belong.
Right.
Whereas if you stayed at the Bowling Green or Ohio, wherever, there's still that question mark.
Right. If you're at Ohio State or not Ohio State, Ohio or a lesser school, Division II, I hate to put it this way, but the ability to fake it until you make it is still there. When you make the jump to one of these bigger schools, you get exposed quickly if you're not
high,
real.
It's high risk, high reward, right? I mean,
yes.
You go the Jared Verse route where you're a first rounder, right?
Right.
Or if he stayed at Albany, he probably gets drafted, but he ain't a first rounder.
Nope. No, he's not.
So
for him, that was the right move. It was the best move.
Absolutely. But generally speaking, it's not from a production and an NFL standpoint, it's generally not the best move. Like you said, maybe it's the best move from an NIL standpoint. You're getting paid more.
But I think Jared Verse is kind of an exception to the rule again because he had a chance to come out the year before and he didn't. Remember, he went back to FSU for another year because he felt he wasn't ready. There was things he wanted to work on. And I think for him, that was another great move by him. He proved he wasn't a one-year wonder by doing that, but he also improved his game overall, and look what that got him.
Yeah.
Which I think, going back to Trey Moore, he has that opportunity. Yeah, he didn't have the best year last year with Texas, but he has this year to prove, hey, the competition jump was a little much for me, but I know I'm this good and this is what I can do. Now he has to prove it on the field, right? And I think some of the things you're talking about, like snap counts, I know we see like a lot of these players are seeing a huge, huge drop in snap counts, right? Which naturally is going to affect your stat production. But you also kind of got to look at it. Okay, you went from 50 snaps to 25 snaps. Naturally, your stats are going to drop. But what does those maybe like per game averages kind of look like? So I think you got to kind of take a sneak peek at those two. But
all right, the last linebacker, he's gonna be kind of a unique example because he actually improves his stats, but the circumstances are a little bit different here. So this is Aiden Fisher. He goes from James Madison in 2023 to Indiana in 2024. At James Madison in 2023, 108 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. Goes to Indiana in 2024, 118 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 1.5 sack. His snap count dropped a little bit. He goes from 809 snaps to 744 snaps. But his production was better or equal. But the thing with Aiden Fisher is, he transferred up, but who also, quote, transferred up, right? The entire JMU coaching staff. So he followed his coaching staff, right? And so, he followed the coaching staff from JMU to Indiana, and he was the man for Indiana. He was the manager at JNU. Like, to me, that's a bit of a not normal circumstance, right? And so again, a linebacker. He's the second linebacker in our group of 5 here that either did the same or increased or did better. But in his case, he was following his head coach and defensive coordinator. So, like,
yeah, and I think that's a great note by you.
That's a big positive, right? When you're following your old coaching staff. That's probably
because they already know you. They know what you can do, right? And they already, if they're moving, if they move to Indiana and they had you at James Madison, they already know what you can do. They already know, most likely, unless it's an immediate move with them, because they already know their new roster and they already know most likely where you're going to fit in on that new roster. So, like you said, that's a big positive. But if you're just jumping, if you're not I think that's not an asterisk. I can't think of my words today, but like that's an exception, right? Because
absolutely.
And in that instance, I think you get a little more leeway with me. Like, if he's not following his coaching staff, I'd be like, I don't know if this is, the right move, but clearly for him it was. But he was going with something familiar, being comfortable with the coaches. But that's huge, especially at the college level. All that stuff that's huge.
All right, let's move over to our safeties, our defensive backs. First one up is Yam Banks. Talented kid, goes from South Alabama to Ole Miss. 2023 at South Alabama, 46 tackles, 6 TFLs, a sack, 4 pass deflections, 1 interception. Goes to Ole Miss in 2024, 21 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 3 pass deflections. Roughly, his stats get cut in half. Snap count, same way, roughly gets cut in half. 743 snaps at South Alabama, 357 snaps at Ole Miss. He came on towards the end. He did not start a game until week 6 for Ole Miss, so maybe that was due to injury. I don't know, right? But he started the last looks like last 6 games or so for them. But yeah, I mean he in my opinion he hurt himself, because I think if he stayed at South Alabama, he probably gets drafted. He goes to SEC, doesn't do great. I don't know if he's drafted now.
Yeah, because if you look back at 2022, he led the Sun Belt in interceptions and was 3rd nationally, 6th. And he had 11 PBUs to go with that. So that's 17 big impact plays that he had. And I'm with you. He goes to Ole Miss, and he's basically non-existent. So, yeah, that's a huge drop there.
I mean, like I said, not even just stats. I think he hurt his NFL potential stock as well. I think he stays.
Yeah, I agree.
I think he stays at South Alabama. He probably gets drafted. Next up, one of Hollywood's favorites. Safety Devin Grant goes from Buffalo to Syracuse. In Buffalo in 2023, 79 tackles, 2 TFLs, 5 interceptions, 4 pass deflections. Go to Syracuse in 2024, 56 tackles, 1 interception, 3 pass deflections. Snap count goes from – actually, his snap count didn't really suffer that much. He went from 666 snaps to 622 snaps. Just didn't produce at the same level. You're going from the MAC to the ACC.
Yeah, and I thought, for me, the reason that I kind of held on to him last year, hey, I thought, he's a good player. He's not a great player, but I thought he was good. Being in the MAC, I thought he was better than good, right? But I thought going to Syracuse, who we have seen in the past, 4 or 5 years, they've had a history of kind of producing good safeties, right? And I thought, okay, this is, they haven't needed safety, and he's shown that he can play. It's a jumping competition. Let's see how this works. I just thought it would translate, and it just didn't quite work out that way. So,
All right, next safety, someone again near and dear to Hollywood's heart is Jacoby Thomas. He goes from Middle Tennessee State to Tennessee. At Middle Tennessee State in 2023, 71 total tackles, 3 TFLs, 5 pass deflections. Goes to Tennessee in 2024, 22 tackles, 3 TFLs, 2 pass deflections. So quite a big drop in production as far as tackles go. And his snap count's the same way. He goes from 767 snaps to 263 snaps at Tennessee. Doesn't start a single game for him at safety. He's just kind of a rotational piece.
Yeah. And I will say this. I think the intention was for him to be the guy, right? And I don't think anybody saw Will Brooks doing what he did. I thought they thought these roles would be reversed. It would be Jacoby Thomas being the guy with Will Brooks being backup. And Will Brooks he just balled out in the spring. He balled out, once the season started. He shut out the gate. And he took that job and never relinquished it. And thank God, because he had some of the biggest plays of the season for Tennessee. And if it hadn't been for that, we wouldn't make the playoffs. So I don't know that Thomas was just that bad. Of course, the competition jump, right? We talked about it all night. But I don't think they kind of saw Brooks being that good either. I think that was something they did.
Well, but man, that's part of the point, right? Like these guys are going from being the man, being the big fish, to being a fish, right? All the rest of the fish, some of the fish are bigger. Maybe they're not. They're all the same size. But the point is the talent level increases around you. Generally speaking, is going to equal less opportunity for you.
Correct.
All right. These next two guys kind of go hand in hand with our linebacker example in terms of they went up and they went to Indiana. They go from another Sun Belt school to Indiana, and their stats suffer. Now they didn't go from JMU, so they weren't the coaches weren't as familiar with them. But Sean Asbury II goes from Old Dominion in 2023 to Indiana in 2024. 2023 at Old Dominion, 93 tackles, 6 TFLs, 1 interception, 4 pass deflections.
Right.
Indiana, 2024, 69 tackles, 5 TFLs, 1 interception, 4 pass deflections. So his tackles take a pretty significant hit. Takes a little bit of a hit snap wise, 843 snaps to 723 snaps. But again, he didn't play at JMU. Obviously, the JMU folks would be familiar with him, right? But he wasn't their player, and he played for Indiana, but stats wise, it wasn't really wasn't comparable to what he did at Old Dominion.
Right. Yep. I agree.
This next player is going to be the same way. Same situation, goes from Old Dominion to Indiana, and that's Terry Jones. His stats took an even bigger hit. He goes from Old Dominion in 2023 to Indiana in 2024. At Old Dominion, 107 tackles, four tackles for loss, 4 pass deflections. Go to Indiana, 39 tackles, 5 TFLs, 2 pass deflections. Snap count took a big hit. It goes from 743 snaps to 331 snaps.
That's rough.
So both these players came from Old Dominion. If I was to say, well, what was the difference? Why did one do better than the other? Well, Sean Asbury didn't start at Old Dominion. Sean Asbury started at Boston College. And so obviously he was highly recruited, a good recruit coming out of high school. Didn't get much playing time and at Boston College, transfers to Old Dominion, goes nuts, transfers back to the Power Four. Terry Jones Jr. spent his entire career at Old Dominion until he went to Indiana. So that's really kind of, I guess, if I was to say, well, what was the difference between them two? That would be the difference. Sean Asbury was arguably a better recruit to begin with than Terry Jones. But just kind of comparing to the Aiden Fisher example, where these two guys kind of did the same exact thing, except they weren't their coaches, and
which I think plays a part in that. That plays a big part, I believe.
I think it does. I think it plays. I think it's a key part of it.
Yep, I agree with you on that. Yeah, that's. We keep saying competition level and stuff like that, but when you're following a coach that you've already played for, I think that's a big exception that you have to look at, because I think that changes the whole outlook of that player and other players that are coming in with him, right? Whether it's recruits or other transfers, because the coaches already have a familiarity. They're kind of comfortable with your game. They kind of, like I said earlier, they know what you can do in their system, as to where these other guys, they're just going off of what they've seen on tape and film. They don't really know per se how you are in the locker room or how you're going to fit in their scheme. So I think that makes, I like that example. That makes a huge, huge difference.
All right, this last safety, he's an exception. He got better. He's stat wise, he got a lot better. This is Miles Rouser. He goes from New Mexico State in 2023 to Arizona State in 2024. At New Mexico State in 2023, 69 tackles, 1 interception, 3 pass deflections. 2024 Arizona State, 98 tackles, no interceptions, but 5 pass deflections. So he actually stat wise did better, and snap count wise did a lot better too. He went from 691 snaps at New Mexico State to 866 snaps at Arizona State. So he's kind of an exception to the rule.
Yep. So next,
that kind of does it for like the guys like from 2 years ago, right? And again, there's exceptions to the rule.
Yep.
But like, I guess like some key takeaways are, if we're expecting them to have success in general, they probably were a P4 recruit to begin with, right?
Yep.
And they're following their coaching staff.
Yep.
Those kind of seem to be the key points so far. Otherwise, like everything else, it's worse. Again,
yeah, those are definitely the two outliers. Yeah,
Miles Rouser doesn't fit either one of those, but there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. So now let's look at guys that are moving up this year. We'll start with defensive linemen. You got Ben Bell going from Texas State to Virginia Tech. I think Ben Bell's a fine player. I don't think he comes anywhere close to the double-digit sacks he had at Texas State in last year only played 4 games, but in 2023 I think he had double-digit sacks. I don't see him doing anything close to that, and at Virginia Tech in 2025.
Yeah, he had 10 in 23. Like I said, he only played 4 games last year, but here's where people are going to make. They're going to make the wrong assumption, projection. The thought is, okay, he had 10 sacks. He's making the move up to Virginia Tech, who has a need because they lost Antoine Ryland Power. So they're going to see that, and they're going to think, okay, he can step in there right away and fill that role. Sure, he can fill the role, but is he going to be productive? Because that's a big jump from Texas State to Virginia Tech.
Yep. Next, Price Yates going from Connecticut to UNC. Same thing. I mean, talented player, but he's just not gonna put up the same stats I wouldn't expect. Going from Connecticut, where he's the man, to being a kind of a rotational guy at UNC.
Yeah, now I do like his game. This is one of the guys that I've kind of liked coming up. I do like his game, and I think he can play at a higher level, versus a higher level of competition. But do I expect his numbers to be the same? No, you have to have some pause or hesitation. Now, if he does, then hey, that's great. But I think you take away last year, right, because he was hurt, so he missed some time. And when he did play, it looked like he was on pace to be a career season. So, also, I think that it depends on, for these players, what is around them, right? What kind of talent is around them? Are you going, from Connecticut to North Carolina? Talent-wise, I wouldn't say that's a huge win for him as far as, what's on the defensive line. Now, if he's going from UConn to Alabama, maybe I like him a little more because there's talent that can help elevate his game where he doesn't have to kind of carry, right? But then you run into the problem, well, they're so loaded on defensive line, does he get the reps? Which means he's really going to have to be as good as everybody thinks he is, or he thinks he is, to be able to crack, the depth chart to get enough playing
time. Next up, this one is even a I don't know. This is even bigger. There's more issues than just moving up with this one. I'll just let's get to it. That's James Joncom going from Eastern Michigan to Virginia Tech. Here's the other thing that's super important based on what I've heard or seen so far. James Joncom at Eastern Michigan played middle linebacker. They're talking about James Joncom at Virginia Tech being a defensive end edge rusher. Big difference.
Oof.
Big difference.
Yeah,
The other thing, here's the other thing about James Joncom. Before James Joncom came to Eastern Michigan, guess where he was at? He was at Arizona State. Guess what he played at Arizona State? Edge rusher. So, this one's kind of like got 2 red flags for me.
yes.
He's moving back up to a place where he wasn't successful for 2 years in Arizona State. And he's going from the position that made him productive at Eastern Michigan back to the position where he wasn't super productive to begin with at Arizona State.
And I'll give you the third. I've talked about it tonight. He's going to Virginia Tech, and we just said that Ben Bell was going there. So he's already going to have incoming competition at the edge spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like you. This is a no-go for me.
Yeah, I mean, there was a game, I think, Eastern Michigan this past year. He had 19 tackles. He ain't going to have he might only have 19 tackles the entire year at Virginia Tech.
Right.
Next up, Chris Murray, going from Sam Houston to Auburn. A big jump, going from Conference USA to the SEC. It's gonna be a rotational piece. He's not gonna be the man. Again, I'll be honest with you. I'm not a fan of any of these defensive linemen moving up. And if you told me to pick two of them, probably the two I would pick that I thought maybe had the best shot, it's probably Ben Bell and Price Yates. Those are probably the two I would say had the best shot to have similar playing time. Whether I don't think they're still not going to be as productive, but I think they could possibly see similar playing time.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Next, CJ Nunnally going from Akron to Purdue.
Yeah, this is a huge jump for him.
Yeah, and it wasn't like he lit the world on fire at Akron. The team that wasn't very good. Going to Purdue, also a team that isn't very good, but step up in competition. This next one I really, really dislike because he had an outstanding year for Kent State last year. It's Cameron Olds going from Kent State to Kentucky. Now, again, I'm sure he got lots of NIL money to go. But from a production standpoint, he is going to be a rotational piece at Kentucky. He's not going to be the man. He's not going to. He was one of the top defensive ends in havoc rate last year. I don't see that happening at Kentucky, right? He's going to be part of a rotation at Kentucky. Clearly, he probably got a lot more NIL money to make that move, but production, I would expect to take a humongous hit.
Yes, and just the conference jump alone is huge because you're going from a mid-major in the MAC
and arguably one of maybe the
best, maybe
one of the worst conferences in the MAC to the best conference in the SEC, or one of the best conferences.
Yeah, that's insane. Now, if it works out, great, right? If he can go in there and do it, great. But like you said, the theme of the night has been, for the most part, it's not worked out in these instances that we've been talking
about. Next up is Eric O'Neal, JMU to Rutgers. So this will be another jump for O'Neal. O'Neal, I think, came from Division or FCS. I think he came from like Long Island, I want to say, to JMU. Was productive last year at JMU, and now is making the jump up to Rutgers. I don't expect the same level of production. I think he had double-digit sacks this past year, right? 11, 12 sacks, something like that. I personally don't see him having 11, 12 sacks at Rutgers.
He had 52 tackles, 19 TFLs, and 13 sacks last year for JMU.
And now he's moving up to the Big Ten.
Yes, now he's moving up to the Big Ten. And you are correct. He transferred from Long Island University to JMU last year. So, I mean, at that level, he was pretty good, right? I mean, and it seems like the move to JMU was pretty good. he made that jump. So for him, this is kind of interesting, right? So he starts out at Long Island. He makes the jump to JMU, which is football wise is a perennial good football team, right?
Yeah.
So and the production didn't drop off; it got better. So now I think with his size and what he's done so far, I kind of like this move because I think there's opportunities for him at Rutgers, right? I think there's opportunities there for him. Now he just has to prove. He has to be Jared Verse and prove that he's this good. And I think this move will. I don't think he's no Jared Verse. I'm just saying
Sure.
he's followed this path, has that same opportunity, and now it's make or break. Either yes, you are that good, or no, you're not. And I think going to Rutgers, we're fixing to find that.
Next, Clev Lubin going from Coastal Carolina to Louisville. I mean, certainly, I think there's potential for opportunity there. I don't know that he will be as productive at Louisville.
Yeah, and this is another one that's making the double jump, right? So he started out at Iowa Western, which is junior college level of football. Helped in 23, helped lead them to a national championship. He had 23 TFLs, 11 and a half sacks. So, along with 55 tackles, then he makes the jump to Coastal Carolina. Those numbers fell off, but considering the jump, I think those are acceptable numbers. 40, the tackles were pretty close. The TFLs and sacks fell just a little bit, but that's to be expected. But jumping to Louisville, yeah, this is going to be another test.
This next one, I think it's a great move from an NIL standpoint. From a production standpoint, like I think it's terrible. Kyron Duhan, true freshman, UTEP, one of the best true freshman edge rushers in the country this year. I don't think he was super efficient with his snaps. His efficiency numbers weren't great, but he's going from UTEP to Oklahoma State. I personally if he even went back to UTEP, would have some slight concerns about him repeating the numbers at UTEP, just because of how inefficient I think he was. Now he's making the jump up to Oklahoma State, and that to me is just a whole another ball of wax.
Yeah, and a couple of things here. At his size, 6'2", 249, you might get away playing interior defensive line at UTEP. That's not going to really work at Oklahoma State, where you're facing much bigger offensive lines than you're used to facing. Now, one good thing is he's still got 2 years left, right? So he's got a junior and senior season to where maybe he can develop into this. So I think for players like him that still has some eligibility left, I don't hate the moves as much because I think there's still time for them to develop and either make or break. If you're a senior and have no eligibility left and you're trying to make these moves, I think the pressure's really, really, really on you because you've got no room for error. This is your one shot, kind of.
Sure. Next up, Corey Walker going from Western Michigan to Wisconsin. Don't love it.
Me either.
I mean, he was semi-productive, somewhat productive there at Western Michigan. I don't think he's going to be have much production at all for Wisconsin.
Yeah, 38 tackles, 5.5 sacks last year, and that was his best year. So, I mean, I think it may be a stretch for him to get back to those numbers, right? I mean, those are not world-beating numbers to begin with.
No. Yeah, and but a huge step up in
Competition, yes.
competition. The last edge guy, on the surface, I think this one, it doesn't look as bad as the others, but when you dig deeper down, I think it's not so great. And that's Jamoy Robinson going from UTSA to West Virginia. On the surface, I don't think that's a bad move, but if you look at his production at UTSA, like his sacks, like it came in like, I want to say 2 or 3 games. I don't have. Do you have his? I feel like he got like multiple sacks in 2 or 3 games, and that was it. Other games he did absolutely nothing.
Yes, so really, he had 10.5 sacks on the season. Right? Started off strong with a sack against Kennesaw State, a sack against Texas State, was shut out against Texas, and then had a sack against Houston Baptist. So that kind of goes back to what I told you earlier. If you're going to keep these players, start them early in the season when they're playing these cupcakes. But like you said, the one thing is week 11 or game 11 against Temple, he had the world-beating game: 7 tackles, 6 solos, 5.5 for a loss, and 4 sacks. So almost 50% of his sack totals, well, about 40%, came in that one game. You take that one game away, he only had 6.5 sacks.
That's kind of my point. Like, yeah, I don't think. I mean, this one doesn't look like that bad from on the surface, right? From the jump up from UTSA and the American, which is, one of the better G5s, to the Big 12, which is probably, you could make an argument, the worst P4, right? So from that standpoint, it doesn't look that bad. But then when you actually look at his numbers, like you said, almost half his sacks came from one game.
Right. And if you look at the 2 big games, I call them the 2 big games. Texas, on the road at Texas, he had 1 tackle. That was it. Memphis at home, he had 2 tackles. The other game, and they're so hard to judge because of what they run, but he finished the season on the road at Army, 3 tackles with a sack. So he actually got okay there, but yeah. I mean, against the 2 big ones, Memphis and Texas, and not that Memphis is huge, but the better competition, he kind of disappeared, right? They took him out of the game.
Yep. All right, moving over to the linebackers. First one is Boom Jock, who had a breakout year for Colorado State. Now he moves over to Cal.
I don't hate this, though.
I don't hate it. I think to me, you're kind of paying attention to see, is he going to be the starting middle linebacker for Cal? Is he going to get that opportunity?
They lost. Is it Schlesinger that they lost?
No, they lost Teddy Buchanan.
Oh, Buchanan, yes.
But just because the opportunity's there, right? But like we said earlier, the opportunity was there for Key Thompson too.
Right.
And so again, I think this is it's kind of something to probably pay attention to, and maybe in spring ball and see or like when we get some depth chart news early in the fall, in August.
Right.
This next one we talked about earlier. This is Jock Evans, Baylor. he is moving to Colorado State, so moving to a system similar to where he was at Western Kentucky. I think the big key to him is he healthy? Can he stay healthy?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
This next one's really interesting. He was one of the top tacklers in college football last year. Travion Barnes going from Florida International to Baylor. Can he be productive at Baylor? Yes. If you're expecting him to be as productive at Baylor as he was at Florida International, yeah, I think you're in for a rude awakening. Do I think he can get 100 tackles? I do think he can get 100 tackles, but I don't think he's going to get nearly. I don't know what do you have 143, 150
Let's see.
at FIU.
I'm looking at Sports Reference. It says 129, which was fifth in the NCAA.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't see him getting that high for a number of reasons.
Well, one reason I would
he's making
the
a step
70
up.
assisted tackles is kind of a warning too, right? Like,
Yeah.
how does Baylor score? You know, their statistician. How do they score? I mean, that's something you have to think about. And I know Matt Jones is gone, and last year they had Jones, and I forget the other the guy right off the top of my head. But they had two 100 tacklers at linebacker. So Baylor could support that. And I think Baylor they're trying to get back to being one of the better teams, right? But I think there's still some pieces away. So I think Barnes has the opportunity. I'm with you. If you're expecting what he got last year, I think you're kind of setting yourself up to fail. But I would look at 90 to 100 tackles, and anything you can get after that, I think is great.
I think the other key thing is Florida National wasn't a very good team, right?
True.
And you know, in addition to you know, the step up, he's moving to a team that's just a better team. So I expect that to also limit his opportunities compared to what he had at FIU. In addition to more competition, right? More competition for tackles. So I just think, while you know, it'll be interesting to see. I just think overall, it's a bit of a downgrade in terms of, you know, what he did a year ago. Next is Martavius French, going from UTSA to Colorado. This one I don't hate, right? We've seen guys go from the G5 to Colorado and be successful. You know, maybe French can be that guy. I don't know. I feel like he has a 50-50 shot.
Right. Yeah, I don't think he's going to replicate the 17 TFLs he had last year. Which is his numbers are kind of weird to me. Like, he had 80 tackles and 17 TFLs, which are solid numbers. The TFLs, that's really good. That led the American Conference last year. But for a player that, with the TFLs, kind of shows that he's playing behind the line of scrimmage a lot, right? He only had one sack, which is kind of weird to me, because usually if you've got the TFLs, especially that many, you're having more than one sack at some point. So I don't know. Those numbers just, to me, aren't kind of matching up in a way. But I do like the fit with Colorado. I think if he's going to happen anywhere, it's going to happen there, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think this is also the point in the list where the rest of these guys, I don't like it at all. Like these guys, the rest of these guys, like I hope they got some good NIL money because I don't think the production is going to be anywhere close to what it needs to be, and I don't personally don't see any of them having much NFL potential. So the first one, and it might be the biggest head scratcher to me. I don't know why they felt the need to go get him, but fine player, great player. I just don't think he's not going to be the man like he was for Georgia Southern, and I don't even know he's going to start. And that's Marquise Watson Trent going from Georgia Southern to Nebraska. That one is I didn't feel like linebacker was a position of need for Nebraska. And so the fact they went out and got him, just I don't know, seems it's kind of head scratching to me. I'm assuming he got some money, but man, like from a college production standpoint, count me out, man. Count me out.
I mean, he had at Georgia Southern, he had 3 straight 100-plus tackle seasons, 114, 122, and 120. So, I like the player. NFL wise, I'm like you. I don't know that he's a whole lot. I think he'll get a look as long as he has a good year this year. I think he'll get a look at the NFL, but I think he's more of a backup at best. There, he's a little short, right? 5'11", 220, so he's a little small. Not to say that he can't be productive at that size. I'm kind of with you. I was kind of shocked Nebraska did that or went after him, and maybe it was a money thing. Nebraska still needs some work. So they're up and coming, and they're going to go as far as Dylan Raiola will take them, right? Ravioli. As far as he'll take them, that's where they're going to go. I don't know that he'll get back to 100 tackles. I think he'll be close, but that even if he hits 100, that's roughly 20 to 25 tackles off of where he's been, right? So I think the realistic expectation is around 90. I wrote an article on him, and I think he's basically a 1-year rental for you in college. That's kind of where he's at because I'm like you. I don't know that his NFL potential is a whole lot. And it's going to take him having a really good, another good year this year, right? It's a step up in competition. You're going from the Sun Belt to the Big Ten.
He's probably not. Probably not a starting linebacker for them.
Right. So I mean, if he comes out and has gangbuster right out the gate, then you probably want to move him because, like you said, the NFL side's probably not there. I mean, he may get a look, but it's basically going to be backup or special teams.
So next up, Jaden Yates going from Marshall to Ole Miss. One of the top tacklers in the G5 this past season. There's opportunity at Ole Miss, but Jaden Yates isn't a big kid. I think he's like 220 pounds, 223 pounds, something like that. I don't see him being the man in the middle for Ole Miss. Again, I think he's a rotational piece for them.
Yeah, I would agree. And 87 assisted tackles last year, which led the Sun Belt. Which, again, how does that translate to the SEC? Because each team's statisticians are different, so you never know.
Zakai Barker going from East Carolina to SMU. He's a little bit undersized as well. Good player. I don't expect to see the same level of production at SMU. Brian McCoy going from Akron to Oklahoma State. One of the best, all conference linebackers in the MAC going to Oklahoma State. a big jump. I don't know. Like, I just don't like it. I don't like the jump.
No, I'm not crazy about it either. And Akron wasn't a very good team last year. 4-8.
Absolutely right.
And
Exactly. So he had a lot of opportunity because he was on the field a lot.
so, and we've already mentioned probably their best two players in McCoy and Nunley. They've already jumped ship and went somewhere else. So that team's going to be possibly even worse next year. So if you're looking to add something, maybe go to Akron and see who's who's going to fill the role for those two guys, right? I mean,
right. No, you make good points. Like a lot of these guys, you'd be wanting to know who's going to be the next guy with a spot they're leaving.
Yeah, exactly.
Last linebacker, another linebacker from Marshall, Landon Watson, going from Marshall to Kentucky. Yeah, I'm out. Like, I think Watson was probably barely rosterable at Marshall. He's not really rosterable at Kentucky, where he's going to be a big part of the rotation. Moving over to safeties, we got Christian Ellis going from New Mexico to Virginia Tech. Yeah, count me out, man. Like, New Mexico was one of the worst defenses in all of college football a year ago. He was in a lot of shootouts, so a lot of opportunities for tackles. That ain't going to happen at Virginia Tech. His numbers, I think, take a massive hit. Just from that, much less the uptick in competition.
Yeah, I don't like that situation either.
CJ Christian, Florida International, same thing. Going from Florida National to Washington. Super productive guy on a really bad defense. Going to Washington, count me out. This next one, if I had to pick like a couple, maybe 2 or 3 guys here that I could see him doing the same. He'd be in that group of 3, and that's Caleb Weaver going from Sam Houston to Duke. Talented player. I think he can produce similarly. Not saying he's going to produce the same amount of numbers he did at Sam Houston, but I think he can produce close to what he did at Sam Houston at Duke. Next up, Don. Do you have anything about Weaver?
No, go ahead.
Dante Joyner, Arkansas State to Maryland. Don't like it. Don't like it at all. Big jump. Arkansas State, not a good defense. So that certainly helps Joyner's numbers. This next one, I think I don't hate it.
I don't hate this one either.
And that's CJ Hurd going from Florida Atlantic to Vanderbilt. CJ Hurd was a high-level recruit for Florida Atlantic. He was a true freshman, balled out at Florida Atlantic. Again, I don't expect them to have the same numbers, but I think they're fairly. I think they could be fairly similar at Vanderbilt.
I do too. I mean, he had 82 tackles, 53 solos, a TFL. That's pretty much it. I mean, he had a PBU, a fumble recovery.
And when I say similar, like I would say like, the high 60s. I could see him with like 69, 68 tackles, right?
Yeah, and I mean, he may approach 80 because even though Vanderbilt's improved, they're still taking it on the chin week to week for the most part in the SEC because that's a gauntlet. And if you don't have your stuff together playing in that conference, it's going to be a long season for you. And Vanderbilt is generally at the bottom of the conference. And if you're at the bottom of the conference, that means that your defense is probably on the field a lot because you're probably getting it handed to you on a weekly basis. So I know they had the big year last year where they upset some people and they played really good, but I think until they get some superstars on defense, I don't know that it's ever going to change for them. So I'm like you. I kind of like the move for Hurd here because I think out of a lot of what we've discussed, I think he has a good opportunity as any to replicate what he did last year, right? Even with the jump.
Yeah. Next up, don't like it. JoJo Evans going from Florida International to Louisville. Again, going from a really bad Conference USA team to Louisville. Yeah, like don't expect anywhere near the same level of production. Next,
Yeah, I would agree.
Next, Zachariah Poyser, Jacksonville State to Miami. Kind of the same thing. Jacksonville State was a really good defense, and last year. And I think Poyser's a fine player. I just don't think that the production level will be the same at Miami.
Right.
Next up, I don't
Easy
hate
now.
this.
Next one.
I don't hate this one. I don't hate this one because I think the guy's going to be in the NFL.
Yes.
But from a college production standpoint, I don't like it. And that's Dylan Thieneman going from Purdue to Oregon. Like, he is not going to, in my opinion, he's not going to come close to the level of production he had at Purdue at Oregon. There's just so much more talent at Oregon. You know what I mean? Like, he's not going to be head and shoulders the only guy that can tackle. I mean,
yeah,
I'm keeping him where I own him because I think he gets drafted. He goes to the NFL. But
yeah,
I'm not relying. I'm not going to be starting him every week because I just don't think the production is going to be there.
yeah. I dropped him in my Devy rankings a little bit. I still have him pretty high, but I think that's because, like you just said, he's going to make the NFL. Right? He's going to be on that trajectory unless something happens here. So that's kind of why I've kept him higher in my rankings. I think that, like you said, the tackles probably drop because there's so much talent at Oregon. But I think you could see his coverage numbers go back up. Like his freshman year, he had 6 interceptions. I think you could see him maybe get 2 or 3 this year because there is so much talent and they're going to force some bad throws. And I think he's good enough. He's going to capitalize on that. So in that department, I think he bounces back from what he had last year because last year he didn't have any, right? He primarily was an in-the-box safety. I think going to Oregon, he's still going to be in the box some, but I think they're going to let him drop in coverage and get back to what he was kind of his freshman years. But, yeah, I do expect his tackles to probably drop. I think around 80 is about right, 80, 85, and that's dropping, 20, 25 tackles? I mean, that's kind of the high end.
I think 80 to 85 is probably the high end for him. Like, yeah. Again, like, I kind of see, like, my expectation would be, like, high 60s.
Ooh. Wow. Okay, I'm off from you then. I'm thinking 75 to 85.
I mean, my expectation would be, like, 67 to 73, somewhere around there.
Yeah. So there's our first kind of not disagreement, but
I don't hate him. Like I said, I don't mind. I think the move's a great move for his NFL potential. I think, but from a college production standpoint, I don't like it.
Right. That'll be an interesting one to watch this year for sure.
Yeah. And then this last one, again, I think this is kind of like Thieneman in terms of I think we're going to see him in a different role, different type role. And that's Jerron Manning going from Old Dominion to Mississippi State. Obviously, he got a lot of NIL to go to Mississippi State, a lot more than he would ever get at Old Dominion. So I can't fault him for that.
Right.
I don't hate the player, but he is not, in my opinion, he is not going to get the same level of production. At Old Dominion, he was a good tackler. He was good against the run, and he was good in pass coverage. He was good in both.
Mm-hmm.
He goes to Mississippi State. Isaac Smith at Mississippi State He was there in the box safety. He didn't go anywhere. So my personal opinion is Jerron's not going to be playing nearly as much in the box for Mississippi State as he did at Old Dominion. He's going to be playing a lot more in coverage. And so, from that standpoint, like I don't see the production being there again with the move up. And I think what I expect to be kind of a change in roles for him. We saw 2 ODU safeties 2 years ago go from, close to 100 tackles to, I think, what was it, 72 and 39?
I think so.
And they went from ODU to Indiana. I think we could see something similar for Jerron. And like I said, I expect his role at Mississippi State to be very different than what his role was at Old Dominion.
Yeah, I think you're right. You're going to see his coverage numbers probably like his PBUs are probably, if he gets the reps, they're going to go up, right? He had 3 last year. So he's probably going to have, I don't know, 6, 7, but that's not going to offset the drop in tackles because he's not getting 85 tackles.
Correct.
I think he's a little bit different from Thieneman just because of the talent. So I think with him, I think he's going from 85 to what? 55, 60, maybe? Yeah, that's kind of where I was thinking. So, yeah, I think
he's definitely going to play a different role because I don't see them. I don't see him supplanting Isaac Smith from his role.
No,
which is kind of Isaac Smith's kind of the in the box safety. I think Jerron's a better coverage safety than Smith, and so he's going to be used more in coverage.
Agreed.
And that's the end of the list. None of these, like Dylan Thieneman's kind of like this year's version of Nick Scourton, where he's not hurting his NFL stock, but his college production is probably going to take a little bit of a hit.
Yeah, I think it will take a little hit, but I don't know, and maybe I'm just wrong on this one, but for the most part, we've agreed on all of them. But I think for Thieneman, I think he's still going to have. Will he get the 100 tackles again? Probably not, but I still think he's going to be 80, 85, 75. So he's going to be in that range somewhere. And if he's getting more, if he's giving you more in the coverage, interceptions, PBUs, then I'm okay with that because I think, like you said, NFL value is really worth that, right? So some of these others, it's going to be rough. I think if you're expecting them to repeat what they did where they were at, you're setting yourself up to fail a little bit.
Yep, absolutely.
We do have a listener question from our good old friend Sal. He follows us on Twitter and Discord, but he left this one on Discord. How deep do you really want to go in a supplemental draft on incoming freshmen on the IDP side of things for a C2C? So many of these high-ranked IDP freshmen still sit for 1 year. Many sit for 2 years. It's just hard to invest in players who might not show results for a year or two when you have limited roster spots. First of all, if you have limited roster spots, yes, it's tough if you don't have the bench spots or the rosters. It's tough. I don't care how good the kid is, right? I mean,
I've talked about this ad nauseum. You're never going to see me go after these guys because I'm not. Didn't someone use a first round draft pick on Sammy Brown last year?
Yeah, I think it was it Dougie?
Yeah, I think he used a first round draft pick on Sammy Brown.
And I love Sammy Brown. And I think
if that's going to be the cost of that, like I'm out 100% out, 100% out.
Right. I mean, I probably take IDPs as high or higher than anyone. I really do. But even I wasn't taking him that high. And I love Sammy Brown. I think he's going to be a great player. I think you're going to see a lot from him this year. But the draft capital, that's a little much because, again, to a player we talked about earlier, Caleb Downs is a unicorn. It's that good in high school and going to Alabama and can start and play right away. You don't find those everywhere. You don't. I mean, those are generational type players. I hate throwing that out there, but that's kind of what it is. I mean, you just don't go to start day one as a true freshman anywhere, let alone go to do it at Alabama, right? So if that's what you're chasing, then you're in trouble. However, if you've got deeper rosters, right, where you have the flexibility to maybe take a couple of these guys and stash them away and wait on them. Yeah, if you've got a Sammy Brown that you think is probably going to set as a freshman, and maybe a sophomore, but that junior and senior year is going to be it. If you've got the room, then I don't mind going after them. But I'm like you. I'm not going to go stupid crazy and take them in the first 5 picks of the draft, right? I think it depends on the size of your league. If you have limited roster spots or it's not very deep, maybe if you've got a flyer late, you take some shots, right? But to jump early in the early rounds, I don't think so. I mean,
Yeah,
but most of my leagues are deep, so yeah.
I'm never gonna own some of these top freshmen because I'm not gonna spend a first round, second round, third round draft pick on them, and that's what it takes, you know.
Yeah.
And then in leagues that are auctions, they're going for pretty penny. I like Caleb Downs went for over $100. I'm pretty sure. I'm assuming. I don't remember Sammy Brown, but
he was over 100 too, if I'm not mistaken.
I mean, I was gonna look it up real quick if I could to see kind of where. Let's see if I can find an auction. Here we go. Let's see results. Auction results. Detailed results. Let's see if
I want to say he was over 100, but I'm not exactly for sure on
that. Holy bejesus. 500 in this league, buddy. In this one league I'm looking at.
Holy cow.
That's freaking insane.
That was not me.
No, that was not you. That was not you. Let's look at this other one. We'll look at this other one now and see what he went. Auction results.
That is stupid crazy.
Well, $400 in this other one. So, yeah.
Oh, so a discount.
Yeah, but that's just those are like those are absolutely that's insane.
Yeah,
like never are you going to see me do that. Like,
yeah, that's
and the $400 that was Sal. $400 that was Sal. Sal spent $400 on him in that particular league.
But like you said, that's what it takes nowadays to get those players. I mean,
Sal spent it. He knows. He knows what it takes to spend.
Yeah, he does.
But that's what it takes. If you want those guys, that's kind of what it takes. But that price is way too high for me. Way too high for me.
Yeah, I think if you've got, like I said, if you've got the roster space and your team is fairly set, right? I think if you've got we'll say a contending team each year, and you've got the roster space and you don't really have any needs that you need to fill later, and you want to take a shot on somebody and you want to spend a little bit or you want to reach on one, I'm okay with that. But if you have holes you need to fill or limited rosters or smaller funds, then you gotta find some way to not do that. Prevent yourself from doing it because you can use that money or that draft pick as Justice is talking about. You can use that on offense and improve your team as a whole, right? Split it up and get it in the later rounds if you have to. I mean, you can always find defensive players. Good question by Sal, though. He's always got good questions for us. So if you have a question, get it into us. We're always glad to talk shop. We'll look at players. We'll talk teams, strategies, whatever you want. If you've got drafts you want us to look at, auctions, shoot them over to us. We'd be more than happy to go over them with you and tell you how you done or what we think. Help us grow. You can follow us on Twitter at Devy IDP Grind. You can follow us on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel. Like, rate, subscribe, and review there. We have Discord. Join us there. We got all kinds of talk going on. And then wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Podbean, Stitcher, basically everywhere you can get a podcast, we're available. We will be back next week. I'm not sure what our topic will be, but we'll figure something out. But we'll be back next Wednesday. So spread the word, and we will see you next week.